The Chen family had been planning this trip for 3 years. Every weekend, they would gather around the dining table with maps spread out, marking islands they wanted to visit, beaches they wanted to explore. 12-year-old Maya would trace her finger along the blue spaces between the islands, imagining what it would feel like to be surrounded by nothing but water and sky. Her father, David, had grown up near the coast and learned to sail from his own father. Her mother, Lynn, was more cautious about the ocean, but she loved the idea of showing Maya a different kind of life, away from screens and schedules. They saved every spare dollar, worked extra shifts, and finally bought their boat. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy and safe. They named it the Morning Star, after the first light that appears before dawn. The day they left Auckland was bright and warm. Friends and family came to see them off, taking photos and waving as the boat pulled away from the dock. Maya stood at the front, her hair whipping in the wind, feeling like an explorer from the old stories she loved to read. She had packed her favorite books, her journal, and a camera her grandmother had given her as a goodbye gift. The first week at sea was everything they had dreamed of. They saw dolphins racing alongside the boat, their bodies silver and quick beneath the water. They anchored near small islands and swam in water so clear they could see fish darting between the coral below. At night, Maya would lie on the deck and stare up at more stars than she had ever imagined existed. Her father taught her their names and how sailors use them to find their way home. But the ocean is never predictable. On the 14th day, the sky began to change. The bright blue turned gray, then darker still. The wind picked up, and the waves that had been gentle swells became something else entirely. David checked the weather reports and his face went serious. A storm was coming, bigger than what they had expected. They prepared the boat as quickly as they could. Everything loose was tied down or stored below deck. Life jackets were checked and double-checked. Lynn made Maya put on her life vest and told her to stay in the cabin no matter what happened. But Maya could see the worry in her mother's eyes, the way she kept glancing at the darkening horizon. The storm hit just after sunset. One moment there was a world around them. The next there was only wind and water and noise. The boat tilted at angles that seemed impossible. Waves crashed over the deck and the rain fell so hard it felt like being hit with stones. Maya gripped the edge of her bunk, trying not to be thrown across the cabin. She could hear her parents shouting to each other above the roar of the storm, but she couldn't make out the words. Hours passed, though time seemed to have no meaning anymore. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Maya felt sick from the constant movement, her stomach churning with each rise and fall of the boat. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the calm water, the dolphins, her father's steady voice naming the stars. Then came the wave that changed everything. It was bigger than the others, a wall of dark water that seemed to come from nowhere. The boat climbed up its face higher and higher until Maya felt weightless. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then the boat pitched sideways with a violence that threw her from her bunk. She heard her mother scream her name. She felt hands grabbing for her, but the boat was tilting. Water was rushing in, and everything was chaos and darkness. Maya's head hit something hard, and stars exploded behind her eyes. She reached out, trying to find something to hold on to, but her fingers only found water. The cold shocked her awake. She was in the ocean, surrounded by black water and wind. She could see the lights of the boat, but they were moving away from her, faster than seemed possible. She tried to scream for her parents, but a wave filled her mouth with salt water and she choked. Her life jacket kept her afloat, but barely. The waves were too big, too strong. She caught one last glimpse of the morning star's lights before another wave crashed over her head. When she came up again, gasping and coughing, the lights were gone. There was nothing around her but darkness and the terrible sound of the storm. She called out anyway, screaming until her throat was raw, hoping somehow they would hear her. The hours that followed became a blur of survival. Maya stopped trying to swim and just focused on keeping her head above water. The life jacket did its job, but every wave felt like it might be the one to pull her under for good. She lost track of time. Sometimes she thought she saw lights in the distance, but when she blinked, they were gone. Her body grew numb from the cold and her mind started playing tricks on her. At some point, the storm began to ease. The wind dropped, the waves became smaller. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. Maya looked around and saw nothing but ocean in every direction. No boat, no land, no sign that anyone else existed in the world. She tried to stay calm, to remember what her father had taught her about survival at sea. Stay with the boat if possible, but if you can't, Conserve your energy. Float, don't fight the water. She did her best to follow those rules, but panic kept creeping in at the edges of her mind. How long could she last out here? Would anyone find her? Did her parents even survive the storm? The sun climbed higher, and Maya felt its heat on her face. She was so tired. Her arms and legs felt like lead. She wanted to close her eyes just for a moment, but something inside her said that would be dangerous. If she fell asleep out here, she might not wake up. She talked to herself to stay alert, going through the names of all her friends at school, reciting the words to songs she knew, counting waves. Anything to keep her mind working. The ocean around her was calm now, almost peaceful, as if the storm had never happened. But Maya knew better. The ocean might look beautiful, but it was also vast and indifferent, and she was alone in it with no way to save herself. Maya didn't know how long she had been in the water. Time felt strange, like it had stopped meaning anything. The sun moved across the sky, but she couldn't tell if it had been hours or days. Her mind kept drifting in and out, showing her memories that felt more real than the ocean around her. She saw her bedroom at home, her mom making breakfast, her dad laughing at something on television. Then a wave would splash her face and she would be back in the cold reality of the endless water. At some point she realized she wasn't alone anymore. There was something in the water near her, something dark moving beneath the surface. Fear shot through her tired body. She had seen enough movies to know what lived in the ocean, but when the shape came closer, she saw it was just a piece of wood, probably part of a boat broken by the storm. She grabbed onto it without thinking, wrapping her arms around it like it was the most precious thing in the world. It wasn't much, but it gave her something solid to hold, something to keep her from having to work so hard to stay afloat. The sky changed colors again. Another sunset, which meant another night was coming. Maya felt panic rising in her chest. The first night in the water had been terrifying, but at least then she had energy, hope that someone would find her quickly. Now she was weaker and the hope was fading. She pressed her face against the wooden plank and tried not to cry. Crying wouldn't help. It would just waste energy and water her body couldn't afford to lose. She must have dozed off at some point because when she opened her eyes again, everything looked different. The water had changed from deep blue to a lighter green color. And there, in the distance, she could see something that wasn't water. Land, an island. Maya's heart jumped. She tried to shout, but her throat was too dry, too damaged from the salt water. It didn't matter. There was no one to hear her anyway. The current was pulling her closer to the island, but painfully slowly. Maya tried to kick her legs to swim, but her body barely responded. She just held onto her piece of wood and let the ocean carry her. Hours passed. The island grew larger and she could make out details now. Dark rocks, green jungle, a strip of beach. It looked real. Not like the mirages her mind had been showing her. When she finally felt sand under her feet, Maya didn't believe it at first. She stood up and immediately fell down. Her legs had forgotten how to work on solid ground. She crawled the last few feet onto the beach, dragging herself out of the water like some creature learning to walk on land for the first time. When she was far enough from the waves, she collapsed onto her back and stared up at the sky. She had made it. She was alive. But as relief flooded through her, another feeling came right behind it. Where was she? Was anyone else here? She turned her head slowly, looking up and down the beach. Nothing. No houses, no boats, no people. Just sand and rocks and jungle. Maya lay there for a long time, too exhausted to move, too overwhelmed to think clearly. The sun dried her clothes and skin, leaving salt crystals that itched and stung. Eventually, thirst forced her to move. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. She needed water. Fresh water, not the ocean that surrounded her. She managed to sit up, then slowly got to her feet. Her legs shook, but they held. She walked along the beach, searching for any sign of a stream or spring. The island wasn't very big from what she could see. Dark cliffs rose up from the beach in most places, and in the center she could see the peak of what looked like a mountain, or maybe a volcano. Smoke or steam rose from the top. The sight made her uneasy, but she pushed the worry aside. Water first. Everything else could wait. After maybe an hour of searching, she heard it. A trickling sound like water running over rocks. She followed the sound to where the cliff met the beach and found a tiny stream flowing down between the volcanic stones. The water was clear and cold. Maya didn't even think about whether it was safe. She put her mouth under the flow and drank until her stomach hurt. The water revived her a little, made her brain start working again, She needed to take stock of her situation. She was on an island, alone as far as she could tell. She had no food, no shelter, no way to signal for help. She was wearing a t-shirt, shorts, and her life jacket. That was it. No shoes, no supplies, nothing useful except the clothes on her back. As the sun started to set again, Maya realized she needed to find shelter before dark. The beach offered no protection from wind or rain, and she had no idea what animals might live on this island. She walked along the base of the cliffs until she found a shallow cave, really just a depression in the rock, but it was better than being completely exposed. She gathered some palm fronds that had fallen on the beach and dragged them to the cave. They would have to do for bedding. As darkness fell, Maya sat in her small shelter and watched the stars come out. They were the same stars her father had shown her from the boat deck, but everything else was different now. She was alone in a way she had never imagined being alone. No phone to call for help, no adults to fix things. Just her and this island and the vast ocean all around. The reality of it hit her then, and she started to cry. Not the quiet tears she had been fighting all day, but real sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her parents, wondering if they were alive, if they were looking for her. She cried for her old life that seemed so far away now. She cried because she was 12 years old and scared and had no idea how she was going to survive. But after the tears stopped, something shifted inside her. She was alive. Against all odds, she had survived the storm and made it to land. That had to count for something. Her father always said she was tougher than she looked. Maybe it was time to prove him right. Maya wiped her face and looked out at the ocean. Tomorrow she would explore the island properly. She would find food somehow. She would figure out how to make a fire. She would find a way to signal any passing ships or planes. She had to, because the alternative, giving up and waiting to die on this beach, wasn't something she could accept. She pulled the life jacket tighter around herself and lay down on the palm fronds. The ground was hard and uncomfortable, and every part of her body ached. But she was out of the water. She was on solid ground, and for tonight that would have to be enough. Maya woke up to the sound of birds. For a brief, beautiful moment, she thought she was camping with her family and everything that had happened was just a bad dream. Then she opened her eyes and saw the rocky ceiling of the cave above her, and reality came crashing back. Her body felt like it had been hit by a truck. Every muscle ached. Her skin was sunburned and covered in scratches, and her stomach was growling so loud it echoed off the cave walls. She sat up slowly, wincing at the pain, and looked out at the beach. The ocean was calm this morning, sparkling in the early light like it was trying to pretend it hadn't almost killed her 2 days ago. 2 days, or was it 3? Maya realized she had already lost track of time. That scared her more than she wanted to admit. She needed to stay sharp, keep her mind working. That's what her dad would say. So she found a sharp rock and made her first mark on the cave wall. Day 1 on the island. She would make a mark every morning from now on, no matter what. The hunger was getting hard to ignore. Maya walked down to the beach and stared at the water. She knew there were fish out there, but how was she supposed to catch them? She had no net, no fishing line, no hook. She tried grabbing at small fish in the shallow tide pools with her hands, but they were too quick, slipping through her fingers every time. After an hour of trying, all she had to show for it was more frustration and scraped knees. Then she remembered something from a school field trip years ago. The guide had shown them how some cultures caught fish in tide pools by herding them into corners. Maya looked around and found a spot where the rocks formed a natural enclosure when the tide was low. She waited, watching the water, learning the rhythm of the waves. When she saw a small fish dart into the pool, she blocked the exit with her body and slowly cornered it. It took forever. The fish kept dodging and Maya kept slipping on the wet rocks. But finally she managed to scoop it up with both hands, her heart racing with excitement. It wasn't much, maybe the size of her hand, but it was food. The problem was she had no idea how to prepare it. She had never cleaned a fish in her life. The thought of eating it raw made her stomach turn, but what choice did she have? She used the sharp rock to do her best, trying not to think too much about what she was doing. When she took the first bite, she almost gagged. It was slimy and tasted wrong and nothing like the cooked fish her mom used to make. But she forced herself to eat it because her body needed fuel. Survival wasn't about comfort. It was about doing what had to be done. The next few days fell into a pattern. Wake up, make a mark on the wall, find water, try to find food. Sometimes she caught fish. Other times she found coconuts that had fallen from the trees. Opening them was a whole challenge of its own. She smashed them against rocks until her arms hurt, getting only small amounts of the sweet water and white flesh inside. But it was something. Each small victory felt huge. Maya explored more of the island, walking the beaches, carefully climbing some of the lower cliffs. The place was bigger than she first thought, maybe 3 or 4 miles around. The volcano in the center made her nervous. Sometimes she heard rumbling sounds from deep inside the earth, and occasionally she saw more steam rising from the peak. But she had bigger worries, like the fact that she hadn't seen a single boat or plane since arriving. She tried to make signals. She gathered driftwood and arranged it on the beach in huge letters spelling help. She collected anything shiny she could find, pieces of metal or glass washed up by the tide, and placed them where the sun might reflect off them. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing changed. The sky remained empty. The ocean remained vast and uncaring. The loneliness was worse than the hunger. Maya had always been social, always surrounded by friends and family. Now the only voice she heard was her own. She started talking to herself just to break the silence. She would narrate what she was doing, like she was hosting a TV show about survival. It felt silly at first, but it helped. It made her feel less alone. At night, she would lie in her cave and look at the stars. She would find the constellations her father had taught her, and imagine he was looking at the same stars wherever he was. She wondered if he and her mom had survived the storm. She wondered if they thought she was dead. The not knowing was torture, but she couldn't let herself dwell on it too much or the sadness would swallow her whole. She started keeping a journal, scratching words into a flat piece of driftwood with a sharp stone. It took forever to write even a sentence, but it gave her something to do in the long evenings. She wrote about what she ate, what she saw, how she felt. She wrote letters to her parents that they would never read. She wrote about her fears and her small triumphs, like the day she finally figured out how to make a better fishing trap using vines and sticks. The island taught her things she never thought she would need to know, which plants gave her a rash and which ones were safe to touch, how to predict rain by watching the clouds, the best times to fish in the tide pools, how to weave palm fronds together to make her cave more comfortable. She was learning, adapting, becoming someone different from the girl who had left Auckland what felt like a lifetime ago. But there were bad days too. Days when she woke up and couldn't find the energy to move. Days when she caught nothing and went to bed hungry. Days when the loneliness felt like a physical weight on her chest. On those days she would cry, but she never let herself cry for too long. Tears didn't catch fish or build shelters. Action did. One morning, Maya made her mark on the cave wall and stopped to count them. 37 lines. She had been on the island for more than a month. The realization hit her hard. A month. How long would she be here? Would anyone ever find her? Would she spend the rest of her life on this rock in the middle of nowhere? She pushed the dark thoughts away and went down to the beach. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, she had to admit that. If circumstances were different, if she was here by choice with her family, she might even enjoy it. But she wasn't here by choice. She was here because the ocean had taken everything from her and left her stranded. Maya picked up a piece of driftwood and threw it as hard as she could into the waves. Then another and another until her arm hurt. It didn't change anything, but it made her feel a little better. She stood there catching her breath, watching the waves roll in and out, endless and eternal. The ocean had tried to kill her, but it had failed. She was still here, still breathing, still fighting. She turned back toward her cave, toward another day of survival. Her stomach was already growling again, and there was work to be done. Fish to catch, water to gather, signals to maintain. The routine that kept her sane and kept her alive. She didn't know how much longer she could do this, but she knew she would keep trying. Because what else was there to do? Give up? That wasn't an option. Not while her heart was still beating. The morning started like any other. Maya made her mark on the cave wall, now a long row of scratches that she had to count carefully. 183 days. 6 months. Half a year since the storm had taken everything from her. She tried not to think about what that number meant. Tried not to imagine her parents back home. Tried not to wonder if they had given up hope. She walked down to the beach to check her fishing trap, but her mind was somewhere else. The isolation was getting to her in ways it hadn't before. Yesterday, she had spent an hour having a full conversation with a coconut she had drawn a face on. She knew that wasn't normal, knew she was starting to lose pieces of herself to this island. But what choice did she have? Talk to coconuts or go completely silent? At least the coconut didn't judge her. The sky looked different today. Clearer somehow. And the air felt charged with something she couldn't name. Maya squinted at the horizon, scanning for the 1,000th time for any sign of a boat or plane. Nothing. Always nothing. She had almost stopped looking, stopped hoping. Almost. She was checking the signal fire she had built on the highest point of the beach when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the island. Not birds, not waves, not wind. It was mechanical, distant, but growing louder. Maya's heart stopped. Then it started racing so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. A boat. There was a boat. She could see it now, small against the vastness of the ocean, but definitely real. Definitely moving toward the island. Maya started screaming, waving her arms over her head, jumping up and down. She grabbed a piece of cloth she had salvaged from debris weeks ago and waved it like her life depended on it. Because it did. But the boat wasn't changing course. It was moving parallel to the island, maybe a mile offshore. They couldn't see her. Maya ran to her signal fire and fumbled with the fire-starting method she had finally mastered after weeks of practice. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the sticks. Come on, she muttered to herself. Please. The smoke started rising, thin at first, then thicker as the dry wood caught. Maya added green leaves to make the smoke darker, more visible. She kept waving, kept shouting even though her voice was already raw. The boat kept moving. It was going to pass by. After 6 months of waiting, a boat was going to pass by without seeing her. Then the boat stopped. Maya's breath caught in her throat. It sat there in the water for what felt like forever. Then slowly, impossibly, it started turning toward the island. They had seen her. They had actually seen her. Maya collapsed onto the sand, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. She was going to be rescued. After all this time, after everything she had survived, someone had finally found her. She watched through tears as the boat grew larger, coming closer to shore. She could see people now, 3 or 4 figures moving around on deck. When they got close enough, they launched a smaller boat to navigate the shallow water near the beach. Maya stood up, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her clothes were barely recognizable, torn and stained and held together with vines. Her hair was a tangled mess that hung past her shoulders now. Her skin was dark from months of sun and covered in scars from countless small injuries. She looked like something from a castaway movie, wild and half feral. The small boat reached the beach and a man jumped out. He was older, maybe her dad's age, wearing a university shirt and a look of complete shock on his face. He stared at Maya like he was seeing a ghost. "Are you real?" was all she could manage to say. Her voice came out rough and strange after so long without using it properly. The man seemed to snap out of his shock. He stepped forward carefully like she might bolt if he moved too fast. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maya. Maya Chen." The words felt foreign in her mouth, like they belonged to someone else, a different girl from a different life. She watched his face change as recognition hit him. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You're the girl from the boat. The Morning Star. Everyone thought you were dead." The words hit her like a punch. Everyone thought she was dead. Her parents thought she was dead. For 6 months they had been living with that grief while she fought to survive on this island. The weight of it made her knees weak. "Are they alive?" she asked, afraid of the answer. "My parents. Did they make it?" The man nodded quickly. Yes, they survived the storm. They searched for you for weeks. Your mother, she never gave up hope that you were still out there somewhere." Maya started crying again, but this time it was different. Relief and grief and joy all mixed together until she couldn't tell one from the other. The man called back to the larger boat and more people came ashore. A woman wrapped a blanket around Maya's shoulders even though it wasn't cold. Someone else offered her water from a clean bottle. She took it with shaking hands and drank, amazed at how different it tasted from the spring water she had been surviving on. They asked her questions. How long had she been here? How did she survive? Was she hurt? Maya answered as best she could, but the words felt jumbled in her head. 6 months of silence had made conversation feel like a foreign language. She kept touching the blanket around her shoulders, needing to feel something soft and clean to prove this was really happening. The man who had recognized her introduced himself as Dr. Whitmore. He was a scientist studying the volcano, he explained. They had come to the island to take measurements and samples. They never expected to find anyone here, especially not a missing girl who had been presumed dead for half a year. "We need to get you to a hospital," he said. You need proper medical care, food, and your parents. God, we need to call your parents. The mention of her parents made something break inside Maya. She was going to see them again. Going to hear her mother's voice, feel her father's arms around her. Things she had dreamed about every single night on this island. Things she had almost stopped believing would ever happen. As they helped her into the small boat, Maya turned to look back at the island one last time. The cave where she had slept. The beach where she had learned to fish. The marks on the wall that told the story of her survival. It had been her prison, but it had also kept her alive. She felt strange leaving it, like she was abandoning a part of herself that would always belong here. The ride to the larger boat was short. They lifted her aboard and immediately people surrounded her, checking her over, offering her food and water. Maya sat on the deck wrapped in her blanket and watched the island grow smaller behind them. 6 months of her life reduced to a dark shape on the horizon. One of the crew members handed her a phone. "Your parents," she said softly. "We called them. They're on the line." Maya took the phone with trembling hands. She held it to her ear and heard her mother's voice for the first time in half a year, crying and saying her name over and over. Maya tried to speak but couldn't form words. All she could do was cry and listen to her mother's voice telling her it was okay. She was safe now, they were coming to get her. Everything was going to be okay. And for the first time since the storm, Maya let herself believe it. She was going home. The hospital in Fiji was overwhelming. Everything was too bright, too loud, too clean. Maya sat in the bed wearing clothes that felt strange against her skin, staring at the white walls and trying to understand that she was really here. Nurses came and went. Doctors asked questions, but it all felt distant, like she was watching it happen to someone else. They said she was malnourished, but otherwise in surprisingly good health. A few infections that needed antibiotics, some vitamin deficiencies, dehydration. Nothing life-threatening. The doctor who examined her kept shaking his head in amazement, saying she was lucky, that most people wouldn't have survived what she went through. But Maya didn't feel lucky. She felt hollowed out, like the island had taken something from her that she could never get back. The news of her rescue spread fast. By the next morning, reporters were camped outside the hospital wanting interviews. The girl who survived 6 months alone. The miracle child. The lost girl of the ocean. Maya heard the nurses talking about it in hushed voices when they thought she was sleeping. Everyone wanted to know her story, wanted to hear how she did it, wanted to make her into some kind of hero. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired and confused and scared in ways that had nothing to do with survival. The world she had come back to felt foreign. How was she supposed to go back to normal life after what she had been through? How was she supposed to sit in a classroom and care about homework when she had spent half a year fighting just to stay alive? Her parents arrived on the second day. Maya heard her mother's voice in the hallway before she saw her, that familiar sound that she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times on the island. Then they were there, rushing through the door, and Maya was in her mother's arms, breathing in a scent she had almost forgotten, feeling her father's hand on her head, hearing them both crying and saying her name. They held her for a long time, nobody speaking, just holding on like they were afraid she might disappear again if they let go. When they finally pulled back, Maya could see how much they had changed. Her mother looked older with new lines around her eyes. Her father's hair had more gray in it than she remembered. The storm had aged them in ways that went beyond just 6 months of time. "I'm sorry," Maya said, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. For falling off the boat? For surviving when they thought she was dead? For putting them through 6 months of grief? Her mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare. You survived, baby. That's all that matters." You survived, but had she? Maya wondered. Yes, her body had survived. She was breathing, her heart was beating, she was alive. But the girl who had sailed away from Auckland 6 months ago felt gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who knew too much about loneliness and fear, and what it felt like to have nothing but your own will to keep you going. The days in the hospital blurred together. Doctors and psychologists and people asking questions. Her parents never left her side except when the staff made them. They brought her favorite foods, though everything tasted strange now after months of raw fish and coconuts. They told her what had happened after the storm, how they had searched, how rescue teams had covered thousands of miles of ocean looking for her. How eventually, they had to accept that she was probably gone. Maya learned that the storm had damaged their boat badly but not destroyed it. They had made it to the nearest port, battered and broken-hearted. They had sold the boat afterward, her father said quietly. Neither of them could stand to look at it again. The Morning Star sat in a salvage yard somewhere, a reminder of the dream that had turned into a nightmare. When she was finally cleared to leave the hospital, the world was waiting. Cameras flashed as they walked to the car. Reporters shouted questions. Maya's father shielded her and her mother held her hand tight. They had a hotel room nearby where they would stay for a few days before flying home to New Zealand. Home. The word felt strange in Maya's mind. That night, Maya stood at the hotel window looking out at the ocean. She could hear it in the distance, that constant sound of waves that had been her companion for 6 months. Part of her hated it for what it had taken from her, but another part, a part she didn't want to admit existed, almost missed the simplicity of the island. There, everything was clear. Find food, find water, stay alive. Here, nothing made sense anymore. Her mother came to stand beside her. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said softly. "Not to the reporters, not to anyone. What you went through belongs to you." Maya nodded but didn't speak. How could she explain it? How could she tell people what it was like to be that alone, that scared, that close to giving up but somehow finding a reason to keep going every single day? Words felt too small for what she had experienced. The flight home was surreal. People recognized her on the plane, whispered and pointed. A flight attendant gave her extra snacks and a sympathetic smile. Maya stared out the window at the clouds and tried to imagine fitting back into her old life. School, friends, weekends watching movies. It all seemed impossible now. When they landed in Auckland, more reporters were waiting. Her parents had hired someone to help them get through the airport quickly, but Maya still caught glimpses of signs in the crowd. "Welcome home, Maya. We never stopped hoping." The miracle girl. She wanted to tell them she wasn't a miracle. She was just stubborn. Too stubborn to die even when dying would have been easier. Their house looked exactly the same but smaller somehow. Maya walked through rooms that felt like they belonged in a museum, artifacts from a life she used to live. Her bedroom was untouched. Her parents had kept it exactly as she left it. Posters on the walls, books on the shelf, her laptop still sitting on the desk. But the girl who had lived in this room was gone, lost somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. That first night home, Maya couldn't sleep in her bed. It was too soft, too comfortable, too far from the sound of waves. She took her blanket and pillow and lay down on the floor. It felt wrong, but also right. Her mother found her there in the morning and didn't say anything, just sat down beside her on the floor and held her hand. The weeks that followed were hard in ways Maya hadn't expected. Everyone wanted something from her. The school wanted her to come back. Reporters wanted interviews. Strangers sent letters and gifts. A publisher wanted her to write a book about her experience. Maya felt like she was drowning again. But this time in attention instead of water. She started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma. Dr. Patterson was kind and patient and never pushed Maya to talk about things she wasn't ready to discuss. Slowly in that quiet office, Maya began to put words to what she had been through. The fear, the loneliness, the moments when she wanted to give up. But also the strength she didn't know she had, the will to survive that came from somewhere deep inside her. Months passed. Maya went back to school, but it was awkward. Her classmates didn't know how to act around her. Some treated her like she was made of glass. Others asked questions that were too personal, too invasive. She had been gone for 6 months, but she had missed almost a year of school with the recovery time. Everything had moved on without her. But slowly, very slowly, Maya found her footing. She started writing, not for any publisher or reporter, but for herself. She wrote about the island, about the girl she had been and the person she had become. She wrote about fear and survival and the strange truth that sometimes the hardest part of surviving isn't staying alive. It's learning how to live again afterward. 2 years after her rescue, Maya stood in front of an audience for the first time. She had decided to share her story, but on her own terms. The book she had written sat on a table beside her, filled with honest words about trauma and resilience and the long road to healing. She looked out at the faces watching her and took a deep breath. "My name is Maya Chen," she began. 2 years ago, I was lost at sea and washed up on an uninhabited island where I survived alone for 6 months. Everyone wants to know how I did it. What gave me the strength to keep going? The truth is, I don't know. I just knew that giving up meant dying, and I wasn't ready to die. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The hardest part wasn't being on the island. The hardest part was coming home and learning that survival doesn't end when you're rescued. It's something you have to keep choosing. Every single day, even when you're safe. Especially when you're safe. Maya talked about the nightmares that still woke her up sometimes. About the therapy that helped her process the trauma. About the support of her parents who never gave up on her, even when she had given up on herself. She talked about finding purpose in her pain, about using her experience to help other young people facing impossible situations. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping, and then everyone was clapping, and Maya felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the lost girl anymore. She wasn't defined by those 6 months on the island or by what the ocean had taken from her. She was Maya Chen, survivor, writer, advocate, someone who had stared into the darkness and found her way back to the light. That night, she stood on a beach in Auckland with her parents, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and red. She had avoided the water for 2 years, couldn't even look at it without feeling panic rise in her chest. But tonight, for the first time, she walked down to where the waves touched the sand. The ocean had tried to take everything from her, but it had failed. She was still here, still standing, still fighting. And that, Maya realized, was its own kind of victory. Not over the ocean, but over the fear that had threatened to define her. She would never sail again, never trust the water the way she once had. But she wouldn't let it keep her away from the shore either. She picked up a smooth stone from the beach and held it for a moment, thinking about the island that had been her prison and her salvation. Then she threw it as far as she could into the waves, watching it disappear beneath the surface. Letting go. Moving forward, choosing to live, really live, not just survive. Behind her, her parents waited, giving her this moment. And for the first time since the storm, Maya smiled a real smile. The journey wasn't over. The healing would take time, maybe forever, but she had already done the impossible once. She could do it again, one day at a time, one step at a time, until she found her way back to herself.